Hey guys, another video for our crime and emergency services in Japan playlist. So you might have seen a video we made recently talking about the Nissan boss in Japan who had been accused of some fraudulent activity and being jailed and then released and then escaped from Japan to Lebanon, and it was sort of in the world news a bit, and it has been a little bit on and off since then as well. And interestingly, it's set off some interesting debate on the Japanese legal system. It's sort of drawn a spotlight onto the Japanese legal system, which is a little bit embarrassing as far as the timing's concerned, because we're getting closer to the Tokyo Olympics, and obviously the media is looking more and more at Japan at the moment, and will be more and more as the Olympics get closer. So it's not really what the Japanese government want people talking about at the moment. So it's been interesting to watch their reaction to it. The Justice Minister got up and made a speech about it, or had a media release about it, and was saying that the Japanese legal system's very fair and the Japanese legal system respects human rights and all these sorts of things. And not long after, so that was the Justice Minister, not long after, one of the other senior ministers who's not involved with justice got up and made a speech about it as well, or a media release about it as well. So they're sort of being pretty defensive about it. So it's been interesting because the guy that escaped, somebody's informed us that we called him Gosen. Apparently it's actually pronounced Gon, which is sort of funny because that means that Mr. Gon is gone, because he escaped. If you haven't seen that video already, it was a week or two ago, and it was called Gosen Escapes Japan or something like that, and that explains his story. But it's been really interesting because the other thing that's come up that's really embarrassing for the government is that people are calling it the hostage justice, and what they're talking about is what we've talked about before on previous videos about how you can be held without charge in Japan. So if you've been accused of something, the police can take you into custody and hold you while they're investigating whatever it is you've been charged with. And the way the system works is, 3 months is not unusual. To be held for 3 months without charge while they're investigating you is not unusual. And during that 3 months, you can be subjected to lots of questioning, sort of more like interrogation than questioning by the sound of it, and without legal representation. So there is some access to legal advice if you want to contact a lawyer or something. But most of the questioning or the interrogating is done without legal representation. So this is what some people are being very critical of, and this is what I just lost that front camera again, don't know what's going on with that thing. And this is what the Japanese government's been defensive about, is because they're getting a lot of criticism about that, of course. And the people with by calling it hostage justice, what they're referring to is the fact that they'll put pressure on you and say, just confess to this thing that we're accusing you of and plead guilty to it, and you'll be given a 2-month sentence, and then you'll be able to go home to your family. And because what happens is the people who are being held in custody can be sort of held indefinitely if the police keep changing the investigation, what they're investigating. They can just keep changing it and keep getting permission to keep you for another month or another 2 months, and it can go on and on. And so what happens is, quite often, people that are charged with more minor crimes tend to be told, and often their legal advice is as well look, if you're guilty, if you plead guilty, you'll get a 2-month sentence. If you keep denying or pleading your innocence and don't admit or don't plead guilty, then you'll just be kept here possibly for longer than that anyway. So you can see the problem, can't you? Well, look, if I plead guilty, if I tell them, okay, sign a confession, that's what they want. They want a signed confession. So, okay, if I sign a confession to this crime that I may or may not have done, then I'll get 2 months, and 2 months from now I'll be able to go home to my family. Or I can just stay here and refuse to sign their confession because maybe I'm innocent, and I could be here for a lot longer than 2 months. So you can see how some people could be pressured into confessing, even perhaps when they're not guilty. And of course, in Japan, once you've been guilty of a crime in Japan, your life's pretty well stuffed, because the way it works here is there's no forgiveness. There's no, oh, he committed a crime, but now he's on the straight and narrow. There's none of that in Japan. It's like if you commit a crime, even as a juvenile, you're sort of labelled for life. And that's sort of it for you then. You're not going to be able to, as a juvenile, you wouldn't be able to go to a good university, and you wouldn't be able to get a good job, and that's pretty much it for you. So by signing a confession to something, you'd be ruining your life. But because of this hostage justice style system, I should put that in quotations, that's what some people are calling it, because of that system, some people are going down that track because they want to go home to their family. And you can just imagine if a person, family's at home relying on you for your income, and you're in jail and you can't look after your family, or you can't, whatever it is, whatever's going on in your life outside the jail, and you want to get back to your life, you can see where some people would be tempted, can't you, just to go, all right, I'll sign your confession. And apparently the interrogations are really interrogation style experiences. In a lot of modern countries now, questioning's done in a fairly professional, unemotional sort of manner most of the time, but evidently in Japan that's not always the case, and quite often it's quite aggressive and more like an interrogation than a questioning or an interview. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear both sides. It's really interesting to hear the Justice Minister and the other members of the government getting up and saying, the Japanese legal system is very fair, and the Japanese legal system respects human rights, and hearing their point of view and then hearing the other point of view. And because some of the people who are giving the other point of view are people like former prosecutors and people like that who are insiders that know what the Japanese justice system is like. And some of those people are the ones who have been critical and calling it the hostage justice system. And it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. For foreigners in Japan, and we've talked about this lots of times before, it is pretty scary because it's also sort of pretty well acknowledged that if a foreigner gets into trouble in Japan, there is prejudice. Not always the case, but there is prejudice when it comes to foreigners getting in trouble in Japan, that the police often, foreigner, naruhodo, tashikani, of course the foreigner has committed a crime, and then so the police are often sort of prejudiced. Not always, got to be really careful. Again, if suddenly I disappear and stop making videos, guys, it'll be because of one of these videos about the justice system. Come looking for me, will ya? Bring a good lawyer. But it's just true. I mean, again, these videos aren't supposed to be critical. They're just observations, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what we're hearing. We've already looked at what the Justice Minister said, and what the other senior ministers have said, but we also have to look at what the other people who are being critical are saying, and this is what they're saying. That and this is what we see with the foreigners. The foreigners, any sort of dispute between a foreigner and a Japanese person, usually it's the foreigner that gets charged, and usually if they are convicted, usually they're penalised to the full extent of the law. Sort of as an example to the other foreigners. If you come to Japan and you commit an offence, this is how you're going to be treated, fairly ruthlessly. And again, we've seen in those debates about all this, we've seen some people, a rich guy like Mr. Gon, who's a rich guy who's been accused of taking money, greedy money, and then fleeing when he's charged with it. And a lot of people object to that straight away because, he's a rich guy being greedy and taking money and running away from the consequences. So there's a lot of people who disagree with him. And that's up to them to have their own opinion on that. But I mean, as far as the justice system is concerned, and the spotlight that's put on it, it's still scary. It's still scary. It would be scary if you were accused of something by a Japanese person. You're a foreigner in Japan. Doesn't matter how long you've lived here either, you're always a foreigner. Even if you get citizenship, some people talk about, oh, you know, I want Japanese citizenship. It won't change anything. You're still a foreigner as far as everyone else is concerned. And if a Japanese person accuses a foreigner of something, you know, and it's the Japanese person's word against the foreigner's word, it's fair to assume that the Japanese person's word's the one's going to be taken, and the foreigner's going to be in a lot of trouble, and, you know, find themselves in jail. If they've got enough evidence, or they think they can prosecute you without your confession, they will, and then prosecute you and penalise you to the full extent that they can. And, you know, if they can't do that without a confession, they'll keep you as long as they have to get one from you. So, shame they didn't do something about that truck driver back there who's talking on his mobile phone. Anyway, there it was. So the hostage justice system, if you see that referred to, that's probably what they're talking about there. The hostage justice system in Japan holds you hostage until you confess to something, is what they're talking about. And they don't really care whether you did it or not. If they want your confession, that's what they want. So, pretty scary from a foreigner's point of view, foreigners in Japan. It's why we always say, you've got to keep yourself be so careful, don't get involved in anything. You know, you don't want to get involved in any altercations or dramas or anything here. Just hold your hands up and walk away, because you will lose, and then not only will you get penalised and to the full extent of the law, but you'll then be deported. So, you know, to a lot of us that would be really, really devastating if you've got family here and you've got your life happening here and everything's cruising along, and then suddenly you got deported. It'd just ruin your life, you know. Which again, that sort of, that goes beyond the punishment. If a Japanese person got, you know, 2 months in jail and then they've paid their price and that's the end of it, but a foreigner who committed a crime here would get 2 months in jail and then deported, which is sort of an additional huge penalty. More so, a lot of us would think that being deported was a much bigger penalty than 5 years in jail, you know, and yet that's what we get. And again, some people would argue that that's fair enough, that if you're a foreigner in Japan, you should behave yourself. And I mean, we've always said that too. If you're here, behave yourself, you know. But again, we're just talking about what we see and what we hear and what is, you know, what it is. So anyway, that's what it is. More videos coming soon.